Hello. So in this video, I'm going to talk through criteria for A-level history essays, specifically thinking about another way to think about how we use and how we apply criteria in A-level history essays. I've done a previous video on criteria that I'll link to in the description, which you can also check out. This is specifically thinking about Edexcel A-level history, but I'm sure it'll be helpful for other exam boards too. So the plan for the video is that I'm going to talk about what criteria is, why it's important. Then I'm going to give this idea that I've got another way of kind of thinking about criteria, give some examples of that, and then give a quick summary at the end. So if you have any questions about any of this, or anything isn't clear, or there's anything you want me to kind of explain, please leave a comment and I'll try my best to respond as best I can. So the first thing is, what is criteria? So as we can see here from this dictionary definition, criteria is a principle or standard by which something may be judged. So it says they award a green label to products that meet certain environmental criteria. So it's how you're judging something. All right. So think about it in history as a kind of basis for your argument. The reason why X is the case is because of this, and the explanation there is the criteria. Okay, it's what you're basing your argument on. All right, why your argument is the case. So why is criteria important in A-level history? So this is the Edexcel mark scheme for level 5, which is the top level you can get for your regular essays. And valid criteria is specifically mentioned in bullet point 3. It says valid criteria by which the question can be judged are established and applied. And it goes on to talk about kind of weighing up the relative significance of the criteria, but we're specifically thinking about just establishing criteria and applying them here. So to get to level 5, you need to do that. You have to have valid criteria which you establish and apply. Level 4, the level down, talks about valid criteria that are only partly substantiated. Level 3 talks about attempts are made to establish criteria. Level 2 talks about criteria for judgment being left implicit. And then level 1, there isn't really any judgment there. So what have we learned from this? To get to the top level, we need to have valid criteria that are applied and obviously established. So here is the kind of idea. This is another way of thinking about criteria. As I said, it builds on the past video that I've done that you can also look at. So think about criteria as a rule, that you are creating a rule that for something to be true, it needs to apply. Okay, so think about it in an essay. You would say, for factor 1 to be the most important cause of something, or the most important, most significant reason for something, that's because of X, Y, and Z. So X, Y, and Z are your criteria. So for the question to be true, X, Y, and Z need to apply. Okay, so if we think about this, if I give an example, hopefully this will make sense. So if I was to say history is the best subject to study because it's the most interesting, it develops the most useful skills, and it expands your understanding of the world. My criteria for saying history is the best subject to study are it's the most interesting, it develops the most useful skills, and expands your understanding of the world. So that's what I'm basing my argument on. So if somebody says, actually, it's not history, it's another subject, they would need to say why the other subject is more interesting, develops the most useful skills, and it expands your understanding of the world. Okay, so it's like rules that I've created for something to be true. Okay, so think about criteria as a kind of the rules that you've created for something to be true. So if we look at an example, so how far do you agree that Charles I is the most important cause of political instability in the years 1625 to 40? So let's say this is the argument. Charles I was the most important cause of political instability in the years 1625 to 40 because his actions had a widespread impact exacerbating divisions between him and Parliament and leading to conflict. So we've got the criteria here as this idea of a widespread impact that's increasing divisions and leading to conflict. So this is the kind of this is the criteria, this is the basis for my argument. So later on in the essay, we might say, well, religious issues or financial issues or the actions of Parliament did these things to some extent, but they didn't do these things as much as Charles did. That's why Charles was the most important cause of political instability. So these things here are my criteria for what factor is the most important cause of political instability. Okay, they're the rules that I've kind of created in order for this to be true. So here's an example from the Civil Rights paper. And this is the breadth topic on literature, film, and TV. How far do you agree that Birth of a Nation was the most significant film for changing race relations in the years 1850 to 2009? And this is a shorter kind of answer that obviously you would build on in an essay. But if somebody said the most significant film for changing race relations in the years 1850 to 2009 was Birth of a Nation because it had the most widespread, long-lasting impact. So this is my criteria for judgment, isn't it? This is what I'm basing my argument on. And if you were comparing this to other films on the specification, for example, In the Heat of the Night or Malcolm X, or any of the other films that you would mention in this essay, you would weigh them up against this criteria. Well, was In the Heat of the Night, did it have such a widespread impact? Was it as long lasting? These are just examples, but hopefully you can see that I'm kind of it's like you're creating a rule that needs to apply. Hopefully this does make sense. And then here's another one from the Growth of Democracy paper. So how far do you agree that the 1832 Reform Act was the most important turning point in the development of parliamentary democracy in Britain in the years 1819 to 1928? And this is an example of a kind of argument. The most important turning point in the development of parliamentary democracy in Britain was the 1832 Reform Act, as this was unprecedented and paved the way for future reform. So we're using this as our criteria, something that's unprecedented and paved the way for future reform. So if you were to compare this to 1867, 1884, 1918, 1928, whatever else you talked about, you'd weigh those other potential turning points up against 1832 and compare them according to this criteria. Are they as unprecedented? Did they pave the way for future reform in the same way that 1832 did? So just some final kind of tips on criteria then. So what I've tried to explain in this video is that it's useful to think of criteria as kind of a rule or rules that you apply to show that something is the case. Okay? So make sure that you include the why for your argument. Don't just say that, yes, it was Charles I that was the most important cause of instability, full stop. Say why. And the why is your criteria. Okay, so my argument is true because, so obviously you wouldn't write it in that way, but that's just think about it like that. So I hope that's been useful. I appreciate that it is quite a kind of complex area, but hopefully those examples and those explanations have been useful for people who are perhaps struggling to get their head around criteria, what exactly it is and how to apply it. As I say, please leave a comment if you've got any questions. Thanks for listening.